Hi, welcome to the Shameless Healing Bridge. I'm so excited. I am having a PowerPoint priestess orgasm today. I just discovered this recording feature and I've been playing with Zoom and the YouTube Live and Marco Polo and trying to figure out how to bring some of these visuals to life, and I think I just found myself embedded in a PowerPoint slide. This is such a fitting platform given my history of 30 years and teaching, bridge building, framework development, metrics of shifts, mechanics of shifts, just creating this awareness in my own story about the potentiality of shift in every situation, and so that has been a driving force in my life, and the backbone of the Joji experiment that we are living in this human story. This is one great big joy of joining in experiment. And in some of my earlier transmissions, I've been sort of teasing up this moment a little bit, but this is kind of a big reveal, you guys. I'm laying out a framework that I'm asking if there's anybody else out there who sees this as a starting point for a global healing conversation. Something so simple, so soft as to be medicine, just in the expression of it. So I invite you to just take a breath and allow your heart to listen. To listen is to lean in softly. Lean in soft with your heart, with the willingness to be changed by what you hear. Those words are from Mark Nepo, and Egan Carrick wrote that song with his words. This healing bridge is a whisper to our hearts. The Joji movement is a whisper to our bellies. I want to bring all of our consciousness into this conversation. Remember early on I said we're just going to throw everything we've got at this moment to show up ready to be in devotion for the healing of the human story. So I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory on this healing bridge because it has a context. Just as you exist in a context, I exist in a context. The new story is a reflection of a contextual shift. And so I want to walk you through some of this lens of shift so that you feel into the metamorphic elements that it is evoking. So, Joji, joy of joining in. JOJIma, steward of Joji. I really do feel like I'm just stewarding this moment and showing up with my unique lens as an invitation for points of light to come and hover and collaborate and be seen and witnessed and allowed. The healing bridge is that invitation to go all in on you, to not hold back, to not let fear, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, too big, too much, not enough. Like, this is an invitation to show up without shame or blame. And so to really get to the heart of shame and blame, I want to introduce you to Dr. Hawkins' Map of Consciousness. Now, he is a really clever guy. He laid out a map for us to start from. Like, you are here. And it's amazing what he understood, that through his own consciousness, he understood that our nervous systems, our electrical magnetic existence has a constant access to the collective consciousness. And so if we get our ego and our mind out of the way and just use applied kinesiology or muscle testing, we begin to collaborate around collective truths. And so he wrote books, Truth versus Falsehood, Power versus Force. He's got 7 or 8, and I recommend them all. I devoured Power versus Force because I could see this dynamic happening in our human construct. And I come from a 35-year background in a fear-based religious construct. So I was trying to understand and find grace for that lens. And this map began to help me really understand that lens through a grateful, compassionate place. And so Dr. Hawkins, for 30 years, built this map and had 250,000 people, millions of calibrations, muscle testing, where these words go. So when he says, since consciousness is evolving simply by our being aware that it is evolving, then we make an important contribution to life by noting the evolution of consciousness in detail. So, who are we? How do we evolve? And so he put it to a hive mind path and said, hey guys, what do you think of this? And where do these, if words tell a story, if they are part of the ancient text of our ingrained beliefs, our software in this hardware of a human form, language matters. And so these words have a frequency, a collective consciousness to them. The word evil has a collective consciousness associated. We have a density about that word. Heaven on earth, we have a light energy around that. Like, we instinctively understand this map, even if the detail doesn't hit all at once. We understand this edge of frequency. We understand our own visceral engagement and lack of engagement with life, the vital force, ebbs and flows. We do have a sense of this. So this map starts to have some common threads of trust. And so I sat with this map for a long time, and I began to really cue into 2 things. The left-hand view, the God view, that at first I looked at this map as sort of a building from bottom to top, and sort of, the denser energies, the more life consuming versus life generating. You start to get a sense of where these words fit, and you'll notice at 200 there's an arrow going up and an arrow going down. And that represents the bias, the logarithmic bias, that everything below 200 has a negative bias. Everything above 200 has a negative and a positive bias. So there's this energy, this vortex of dissonance that is right there at 200. So we're going to come back and zero in on that. But that is it's a tipping point in this map. And it's interesting that it takes 50% of the map to get to 200, and then the rest of the map, there's another 800 points available to us. So it tells you the density of coming into an awakened state of our true nature. This is hard work, and our forefathers have laid the groundwork, especially with what's happening in our country. They were on cannabis too, and so they had some pretty noble ambitions in order to form a more perfect union. That sounds like a recipe for a unified field in physical form. Like, these codes have been here all along, and they have been elevating our consciousness over time. And now we're coming into collective self-awareness around these codes, which opens up a potentiality of acceleration. And so here's the map that we're going to play with as the backdrop to this entire conversation. The Joji experiment, the experience, the healing conversation, all of it is a reflection of this matrix, that this multidimensional invitation to shift based on our own self-awareness and consent that we give ourselves. Nobody has to give us permission to access this. It's here for us. So Dr. Hawkins said, there's some people hanging out at those peace and joy and love levels, and we giggle a lot about what enlightenment is, and man, I'm just happy for an afternoon on my back porch like this. This feels pretty sweet. And my nervous system, my nervous system is lit up. That's maybe what I feel when I think about enlightenment. Reason, acceptance, willingness, this is sort of a rational self-interest level of engagement with this map of consciousness. And there are a lot of people in that rational self-interest. Have a little bit of rational spirituality, rational Christianity, rational other religions. Like, we have this thing I'll talk about in another lesson about big toes, these big theory of everythings, where we put all of our certainty, and we end up with a God who is despising and vindictive and condemning and disdainful and vengeful, that we should be afraid. And look at the emotions, look at the net reality that we end up living in, just based on what we believe is the nature of the mystery. Because remember, we don't know. That's baked into this learning curve, that we inhabit this entire map. We've mastered the lower parts of this map, the shadow. This is where we go to school on our wounding. We move from our woundology to our mythology, and we step out of the fear-based construct. This is where free will kicks in. We have the free will to choose love over fear. And it's the one that lines up with our nervous system, so it kind of rocks. There's no martyrdom, self-sacrifice in this coming into balance with the me and we. This me, we, individual expression serves the greater good. The greater good serves the individual expression because it serves the greater good. It's a virtuous cycle of regenerative expansion. Love only knows expansion. So we've moved all the way through all of that dark shadow to come to this moment of collective yes. I mean, they calibrated and said one person over 700 can influence 70 million people. How many billion? 8 billion. So we got to have a lot of people over 700. Or we could just get real and say, I may never get much above 200, but I'm going to try and trust myself a little bit more each day and show up doing activities that have an impact on others, to joyfully show up, like President Carter and all of his good works with Habitat for Humanity. That's the epitome of a joy of joining in example. There's a thing on HGTV, Hometown Kickstart, people JOJIing up to have pride in their space, in their world again, like to find hope. We find it in each other. It's the gift we get to give each other by showing up. And so these numbers, 15% of the population, out of fear and hopeful for the future, when I did the Joji experiment, we moved the needle on hope by as much as 74% in 4 hours. So like all of this begins to make, it makes perfect sense. And so what is the tipping point going to feel like? How close are we? You know, how far dilated is this mama in this birthing process? How far down into the cocoon are we, this caterpillar who's consumed and consumed and consumed itself down to the point where it can move no more and creates a cocoon around it? Call it COVID. Call it a little quiet before the storm, before this big transition push that may take 3 generations to move through it. But man, we're moving faster because there is this release of the collective shame core. And I'm going to show you a map that really makes this not so far-fetched. So Dr. Hawkins, in his muscle testing, frequency trusting humans, said that at the time of Buddha, we were calibrating collectively at 90 points. Remember, 200 gets us out of fear, but 90 gets us into some animus for life. So, you know, we're moving up all along the way. Christ comes along. He lifts a few million people up. Next 200 years, that message of love and humility and grace, it continues to move us forward in spite of all of its attachments to certainty. The late 80s, the harmonic convergence happens, and the world starts to say it doesn't matter what your big toe is, let's just come together in peace and love. The psychedelic movement, the summer of love. I was 9 years old. Like, this has been in our potentiality, our field, for a very long time. And according to Dr. Hawkins, 250,000 beautiful humans, we hit that tipping point a while back. And so we're actually kind of in this momentum, this coast. And so I want you to get the sense of this lens of energy, that everything above that red line, that tipping point, is generative and it's self-reinforcing and virtuous, and we're above it. We're, you know, and what's below that is the force of fear, is this black and whiteness, binary, non-life supporting, reactive to triggers, like so angry. So you remember all the words, the languaging, shame and blame and anger and humiliation and dependency and addiction. And you can just see the grief, the collective grief of our human story, mapped out in full understanding and full potential for grace. Like, now that we know better, let's do better, so that we don't resist our human experience. We actually fully consent to it. So that's what's on the table, is collective consent to the human experience. So what are we willing to consent to? Well, that was part of my inquiry when I went on my walkabout. And I learned a lot about where we are on this readiness for consent. Dr. Hawkins' map, when you turn it on its side, has a whole different flavor to it. Instead of thinking of this map as a lift, like we have to get there, we have to do something, what if instead it's just a lazy river? And we're on the path of inevitability here. It's the joy of joining in, is you're already in it. And so why not claim some joy while we're in it? We're in this evolutionary awakening state right on time. Right on time. Our nervous systems are fried. We're depressed, we're anxious, we're having a pandemic of loneliness. Our disconnection cannot tolerate this any longer. This is the species imperative that we only thrive through love and connection. And we are not thriving. We are barely surviving. And we have strong survival instincts. So I have a strong survival instinct to map this. It seems to me, and it came through so many hours of just sitting in the shift elements at each, from fear to desire. What does that, enslavement and craving, and I spent so much of my life in food addiction. It came to life in me. And I invite people to sit with this map, because if you would put one word here, there, we have in the Joji experiment, people argue about whether this is exact. We don't have to be precise when we get out of this need to be certain about things and step into the potentiality that we're going to learn something along the way here. That quote I love so much, "If I must fall, let me fall, for who I will become will catch me." Like, we're afraid to take the first step. There's two types of people in the accounting profession. I worked with them a lot, inductives and deductives. And it's not just the accounting profession, but I really saw it there, because that's where I spent so much of my time trying to get them over this bridge, courage to trust. And that's showing up with their clients as advisors and teachers of the level 5 methodology that I shared with you before. And so this inductive, deductive, so inductives, they hang back. They let the deductives, like the dreamers, the visionaries, this is where we're going, this is what it's going to look like. Everybody gets excited. And the inductives go, I love your idea, I can see this. If you really are that close, we're closer than I thought. You can almost sort of buy into it a little bit, but wait a minute, how are we going to do this? What does this bridge look like? What's involved? What am I going to have to do? What am I going to have to give up? What am I going to have to commit to in this healing bridge? And so this is the courage part, and there are knowable elements, and I'm going to share that with you with this Shameless Healing Bridge. But there's also just this moment where we have to say, what are we willing to go all in on? And Charles, thank you for the gift of medicine that comes through your languaging. I feel a kinship there. If I'm not brave, what reason have I to hope others will be? Courage and cowardice both are contagious. My choice establishes a principle of human nature. It declares not only who I am, but what a human being is and what the world shall be. Each choice is therefore a prayer. Our choices scaffold divine creation. That is why synchronicity so often congeals around bravery. Synchronicity is the snapping of the laws of probability as reality shifts to align with brave choices. Seeing that creative power, no one knows the despair was based on false premises. So many conditioned beliefs handed down generation by generation. The ego's guarantee that it will work, and then I'll be okay, then I'll do it. The ego says, promise me that enough other people will resist, and then I'll resist too. Prove to me it won't be in vain. Guarantee that others will join in. God knows, show me that you want a more beautiful world. God says, show me that you want a more beautiful world, enough to actually risk something with no guarantee. Then you'll see results beyond all reckoning. It is your time for choosing here. You'll recognize it when it is. No one can escape that feeling of recognition when the moment comes. I call it the beckoning and the becoming. If you've read this far, that time is close. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Rehearsal's over. It's time to step out of this blame and shame, scarcity, fear-based construct. And we can use our free will to choose to be here now, to fully consent to the human experience as it is. First responders, midwives, not looking for who to blame and shame. We'll have a whole other conversation about accountability and rebalancing and boundaries. That's a different conversation. I just want you to lean into the idea that harmony is within us to create. We couldn't speak it. We couldn't feel it if it wasn't within our capacity to quantum engineer it together. And this is the path. This Shameless Healing Bridge is about falling in love with trust. It's about finding not just the courage, not just the suspension of fear to trust. No, it's falling head over heels in love with trust. This movement from longing to belonging, from separation to connection, from fear to love, is a collective consent to a starting point, a conversation, a place where we can meet each other in grace. So there are 5 movements here in this healing bridge, and I will go through a high level of them tonight in this session and go through them in much deeper detail in the coming weeks. I wasn't prepared yet to offer all of it, but it's making itself available now in this format. And so it's part of the 90 days going all in on whatever comes, whatever wants to be expanded into this moment. It is going to happen here. So invitation to heal, invitation to come home, invitation to meet oneself wholly and completely, invitation to have a neural reset on your nervous system, to leave behind the hypervigilance, hyper-awareness, hyper-vigilance on a scale of panic for some of us, hyper-competence, hyper-independence, hyper-coping strategies. Addictions show up in what we think of as low frequency and or less desirable. And I would offer you that there are only low frequency, but there are also more traditionally, we'll say, desirable addictions, like drug addiction on one side we think of as a low frequency, not desirable addiction. Food, I had that one, right? But I also had a very high reward addiction of being super competent and beyond reproach. And all of those were coping strategies, and they were based in fear. They were not based in self-competence. It was based on a bravado of self-confidence. And so all of us have high and low functioning addictions, and it is this invitation to release the hold on our nervous systems that those coping strategies have. Like, we develop those coping strategies early on, but they do not serve us anymore. And if we become aware of that, we have some agency over the release of them, some somatic support to move our nervous system through these big changes that come with this healing process. But oftentimes we end up in a midlife crisis, or if we have a reframe on that, a midlife revival. So this recontextualization of our story from one of fear and scarcity to one of love and abundance, of one of collective yes to the human experience, all of a sudden, whatever we have to go through, as Gabor Mate has made so clean and clear, we do it shamelessly. We are healing generations of wounding, and our own primary wounding exacerbated by the generational wounded, exacerbated by the collective wound and the wound to the planet that we're on, the threat that is working our nervous systems every day, the smoke, and people are like, it's weighing on us. I've been through multiple wildfires, and Mother Nature's energy is just as intensely focused on us right now as we are on her, and that's a good thing, because we're being initiated to come home to ourselves, to come home to community. And this movement of initiation in a very Western world, we don't have rites of passage. We have a lot of humans that need to be recognized for their medicine and gifts and talents, and encouraged, not discouraged too much of anything. I mean, I've heard too much my whole life, and I'm giving myself 90 days to be all of that and a bag of chips. So invitation, initiation, inquiry. Now those that are in the medicine space, we might look at that as ceremony. That is the place where we go to school on our wounding. We get to the core of the separation, the lost innocence, and we meet it with love. We reparent ourselves, and the flow states can include medicine, but they can also happen in meditation and yoga and nature and church, and wherever you go, to be in that listening with your heart moment, as Mark Nepo says, with a willingness to be changed by what you hear, to move out of the curse of certainty that your life is fixed, that your beliefs are fixed, that we could move into something that has more grace and elegance for the human condition. And then you come out of those ceremonial spaces, and now it's time to integrate. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we move quicker through our triggers. We don't react. We consciously respond. We catch ourselves quicker. We don't loop as long around the why. We get to the all betrayal is self-betrayal, and the rest is unconsciousness. Don't take it personal. Learn what you can learn, grow, and keep moving. Like the weather, moving through our nervous systems, but we tend to loop, and so that is the hard part. This shame core holds us right at this integration, inspiration threshold, this osmosis membrane, because we can feel it, we can see it. It is within us to know our greatness as healers and helpers on this planet right now. And yet we struggle to trust it. The currency of trust is not there yet, and we still have rent, and we still have families, and so we can't completely step out of the old economic story, the one based in fear, but we're straddling into the trust of flow and abundance, and we need to do that in community. We need to show up in support of each other at this 90-10 space, where it only took us 10% of our imagination to get to grace and peace in our life, but it's going to take us another 90% of our collective imagination to get to peace and grace across this planet. So this is a Joji movement in the making, a joy of joining in conversation, and so this map, this healing bridge, this shameless healing bridge, is pretty easy to relate to, starting with our nervous systems. this path from longing to belonging. Like most people say, I don't know about this human experience. I'm not all in on it yet, right? I'm holding back. Still got some judgment about this whole thing. Got lots of story about worthiness and fairness, and so there's an ache there for that harmony, and there's a lot of cynicism in the way of that. And it's starting from our dysregulated nervous systems. We're born into this world needing to be co-regulated. Our nervous systems are learning at such a rate. They're taking in so much information. It's overwhelming to our merger of spirit and matter. And so to be met in a consciousness of love rather than a consciousness of fear sets the tone of our nervous system from the very start. So we're all starting out a little dysregulated, some a lot more. And so moving into community, the initiation of coming together and shamelessly going to school on our wounding, healing out loud, having sacred witnessing sessions with each other where we do not judge, we just hold the space as a sacred witness. One Aya Journey Mama said, you need a circle of sacred witnesses around you so that you can just be who you are, because you were never allowed to be who you are as a child. And I think there's all of us have this naive narcissism. If our self could never be met, or we were overwhelmed by the narcissism of our parents and their unconsciousness playing out in our world, their unreadiness to be keepers of other souls. And so this movement of coming into community to re-parent our nervous systems, to have corrective emotional experiences, as my daughter says, like this community stuff, showing up in conscious, intimate spaces where we own our shit out loud. I have a beautiful story about a brother that taught me this lesson so deeply, so profoundly. He and I had a very hard edge with each other, and it resulted in some big schisms in my life, and 2 years of angst over what I wanted to say and what I wanted to be, how I wanted to be received. I felt that I'd been misread, and for somebody who's lived her life coping by being beyond reproach, I didn't take it well, and it really hurt down and brought some old triggers to the surface, and I worked them for a couple of years, and then we ended up across from each other in a power position in a ceremony, and I'm like, this is going to be interesting. And so I asked him if he would be willing to sit down with me the next day, and we could have a cleanup on aisle 3, a clearing. And he was like, I don't know. And I said, well, it would mean a lot to me if you could give me some closure on what happened between us. And he said, well, if I can bring my friend. And I said, great, I'll bring my husband, and we'll have a beautiful little healing ceremony. And yet that night on medicine, I'm like, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna say this, and I want to, and I'm gonna, and what about? And she goes, nope, that's not what you're gonna say. That's not what you're gonna say. And you gotta get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, because this is about you. This is about your integrity. This is not about any. This is you knowing your part in every betrayal. And so the next day came, and I wrestled all night. It just didn't, I wanted more. The ego wanted more, but the heart accepted the teaching. And so as I was coming around the corner to sit down with the 4 of us, he said, I don't know if I can do this. I've got enough on my plate. I can't handle any more from anybody, any direction. And I turned around the corner. I said, I think this is going to be surprising for both of us. And I sat down, and we sat across from each other, and my husband and our friend. And I said, this is not what I expected to be saying, but it is what is the right thing to say. And that is, I apologize for how my wounding spilled into your world. That's it. I apologize for how my wounding spilled into your world. That is the only thing I can take forward in this moment, right? And he was a little bit surprised, and I was surprised, but there was such a softening in my nervous system in that moment, and I realized, man, I don't need to make anybody wrong. I just got to own my shit and keep learning, closing that gap on knowing better and doing better. And so you can't do that work on a mountaintop by yourself. You need to be in community. That's why so much of this co-regulation work is community work. And if we understand what it is, we go to school on our wounding, we show up ready to own what is true and reclaim ourselves in integration. And what you can't see is the word manifestation, is that once we fully reclaimed ourselves, it's not that we won't ever be triggered, but we master the Frankel pause with a moment between stimulus and response. We consciously respond, and sometimes that is to not respond at all, to not give it any energy, not to steal any precious energy away from our own joy of joining in, our own pursuit. So this map takes us from a recontextualization of our experiences to this sense of a timeline that we've been on, learning and growing and expanding and integrating, and it can take a lifetime to map this in your nervous system, but once you've done it, you can do it in a nanosecond and go, oh, that was interesting. Like when the fires came and almost took us out, like, wow, all right, life is happening for us. What does this mean? What is the next curious adventure that we're going to go on? And I want to offer up that what's behind my little face there is what's ahead for us is moving from life happened to me. I'm a victim of my story. I'm looping in my woundology over and over again. But now I'm ready to go to school on my wounding because there's no shame in this. We're all doing the same work. We're owning our shit. We're cleaning up the mess on aisle 3. The family work that I'm seeing happen right now, multi-generational cleanup, circuit breakers, estranged parents and children, owning our stuff, because like, I apologize for how my wounding spilled into your world. How can we move forward from here? This recalibration to believing that we could live in harmony doesn't come without some cynicism. Like there's work here for sure. And when we're doing it together, it's lighter work. You just take the shame out of it. I do healing out loud sessions with people, and it just opens up this place where we now have so much grace and compassion, and we're inspired to action. That's the last element of this inspiration piece. And so I want to kind of share with you that this map is big. And I want to take you through the 5 healing conversation questions and how they relate to each of these movements, and the mindset and the skill set, and what's happening with your nervous system, and what's happening with your transitional awareness. Like, what does transformational tension look like in your world? It's the falling away of friendships and structures and jobs and identities, and And it can be so disorienting and also completely freeing if you have a midwifing lens versus a fear lens. Like this, there are readiness factors when you can see, I'm scared, but I'm ready to release the story of me that has been so hard to maintain, like the energy it takes to be out of alignment with ourselves is because of fear of how we'll be judged, what people will say, what they'll think of us. Like this movement that we're in, this awareness that we're coming to, this evolution of our psychology, this physical, metaphysical, biochemical, spiritual, and also rational approach to the human condition, starting by bringing it out of the shame closet, like really owning our stuff out loud. That's why you hear me tell so many stories about how we're learning, right? That's my friend Kent in his interview in Joji 6. Oh my goodness, Kent, the blessing you are for showing up, talking about your dark night of the soul and how you've moved through it. And we continue that Kundalini spiral, seeing the thing. It just doesn't impact us in the same way. We have another layer of nuance, more consciousness around how everything's kind of perfect. So now I want to share with you just a little uplift before we close on this session. I will be doing the rest of these 5 movements in more detail the week starting on July 7th. And so that's a week from today. I'm going to do 1 a week and put them up in this sort of a format so that it could be a series that people can take their friends and family through and add to. This is just my offering, my devotion to a possible starting point for the reboot on our human condition, a collective yes, not needing to agree on whose God is right and wrong, but agreeing to agree that there is a field of love for us to explore together. And I am certain that God would be most pleased, however you define that word, in us getting to the but, and I'd like to live in harmony, and resolving that but through grace and hope. This is what Joji sounds like. Just if you've ever sung in a choir, you know that harmonic amplification that happens in your body. And to do it in that Joji sort of just playing with the pentatonic scale. Like Jacob Collier is now doing this all over the world. And yes, there are a lot of choirs that go, but also a lot of people just like me who just love to sing. Not necessarily the best, but it won't stop me. So I thought, well, what does that look like? Not just sound like, but what does it look like? And nature is the teacher for this. So this is a murmuring and a natural occurrence. A man told me at the end of my JOJI experiment up in Oregon, he says, you know how they do that? And I said, I don't. And he said, they have exquisite boundaries. They know where they end and the other begins. And then they just flow. They have this perfect balance of me and we. I just love that. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead. There are a lot of good people doing a lot of good works out there right now. I'm not trying to usurp or override. I'm just asking if we can come together and breathe together. There's so much goodness coming forward, and I think, like I saw in the JOJI experiment, hope happens in community. And when we see other people not caught up in the fear-based, negative, reinforcing spiral, but who are holding their own in this chaos, like these are the people you want to be in community with. These are the people that are going to help you navigate your nervous system to a place of self-regulation, because that's where we're moving to, this ease of beingness, this curious observer, laughing most days pretty hard, but also crying pretty hard. So how can you help the JOJI movement? Subscribe to YouTube and jump into the teachings. Just whenever you have time, just drop in and ask a question. And I've got 90 days to fill up. I need some conversation, some back and forth. Feel free, clip, reel, TikTok, any of this content, share it. But don't just share it blind. Share it with why it matters to you. It's time for us to put some spiritual capital out there in the world, the currency of trust. To be a conduit of trust is to be transparent, to show up, first responders, midwives on the scene of a world waking up to its potential for heaven on earth. And then my vision is to get us all breathing together at the top of the hour, and I've talked about that in earlier sessions, and it'll come up again. So in the meantime, download the app. Right now, it's not working on the Android version because it's just a beta test. It's in the Apple Store. Download it and just start to play with it, and I'll take you through a tutorial in one of the future sessions. And join in on the joy of this human experience. May it be so. Aho.